Hello captains out there, this is Kent and I am here to do a special review. I am doing a review of Pilot's FS Global Ultimate Next Generation FTX Mesh. If you remember my previous episode, I talked about what are the rationales for what kind of scenery you want. And I was saying that if you were in general aviation, you want to think about a nice global scenery and mesh so that you have a lot of good things to look at where you're flying relatively low to the ground, low relative to commercial aircraft. Well, I was really curious about getting the mesh that was going to utilize Prepared version 4, and Pilots had a version, FS Global Next Generation, but it was on DVD and now it's available for download. So I downloaded it and got it on my computer, and I was really impressed. But I'll go through that with you. So I thought maybe we should give a tour of what this mesh adds to the flight simulating experience. So I loaded up a nice Bell helicopter here with a big glass dome, so that we can, enjoy a good view and look around. And let's go for a tour. We're taking off from the helipad at Seattle-Tacoma International. So let's just get on with it. So one of the first things that I'll say about this mesh is there are some kinks in it, but the kinks that are in it are not entirely the fault of Pilots. You'll notice some differences, especially when you come around airports. And the reason for that is, as I understand it from the Pilot's website, the Pilots has accurate data for elevations around the world. But many of the airports in Flight Simulator and Prepared had incorrect airport elevations. And it causes Pilots to have to try to fight with this conflict in data. And so around some of your airports you see these really pronounced shelves that you fly off of. So there's some work to be done here, but as they explain it, it's really not much they can do about it. I gotta do some more research and see what we can do to eliminate that. But that's the one thing I want to kind of get off the table right off. So when you fly over some of the airports, you may see the airports on a given plateau. Well, that's what it has to do with. But let's kind of get into this. Now, as I mentioned before, mesh is kind of like this grid system that really helps have more accurate elevations as you go around the flight sim world. And it would be very easy for me to give you some elevations that were in the mountains, and you can see the differences in the ridges. But I really feel like one of the greatest things that you can appreciate from the mesh is actually not so much dramatic mountains, but where you have subtlety. As we're flying away from Tacoma International and we're approaching the Boeing the Boeing testing facilities, as we approach downtown Seattle, take a look around. Do you notice the topography? It's not really flat, it's not mountainous, but it's more rolling hills. And this ultimate scenery really highlighted that when I didn't notice it before so much in the default scenery, or even when I was using Orbx Global. Orbx Global does add to the topography, but not to the detail of the mesh. The mesh is more so for the topography, and global scenery is more for the detailed buildings, autogen buildings, and vegetation. Mesh does sometimes add coloration to the geographic area, but primarily it's all about the grid system and the elevation. So take a look around. Notice how the hills have rolling, very subtle differences in the topography. And so it really gives us some, as I've used the term before, sense of immersion. Let me say right off that, especially when you're flying through scenery like this, mesh is not like this kind of thing that makes it a whole nother simulator or slaps you in the face. The analogy that I really would like to use to describe what having mesh like this does, I want you to think of Flight Simulator as a steak, or you have like a main course. It could be steak, it could be salmon, it could be, if you're a vegetarian, a portobello mushroom, whatever. So the Flight Simulator is your main course. Your third-party software would be like the things that you have with your meal, macaroni and cheese, mashed potatoes, or what have you. Well, I think of the mesh like the seasoning. It's not meant to stand out. It's subtle, but it just brings out the flavor of your main course. And this mesh really does bring out the fact that you are flying through a 3D world that not only has the detail of the buildings, that not has only the details of the plants and the vegetation, but it now brings out the details of the topography. And not in this just dramatic, almost obscene way. Not obscene is not the word I want to use. Just like just overly, just doing too much, for lack of a better word. It's subtle, it's gradual, it adds depth to what you're looking at. Where you normally might have had more so flatness, you now have rolling contours that bring out the topography of the geographic region. I mean, if you look ahead of me right now, you can appreciate that right here we have a bit of flat terrain as we approach this river, but as you look over the river, you can see that the ground or the topography has now elevation. And if I come down a little bit lower, you can appreciate that the elevation is now, like, the peak of that rolling hill is now above us. And if we're going to fly towards it, we're going to have to gain elevation and we're going to have to fly over it. This is really the beauty that the mesh adds to the flight simming experience, be it if you are in X-Plane 11, if you're in Prepared, if you're in Flight Simulator. So this now raises the question, well, where or when do I need to buy this mesh? Well, I have a suggestion as to how to go about this. If I was just getting a simulator and I'm really trying to make it look more realistic and enjoy my flight simming experience like some of the videos that I'm seeing on YouTube, I think, as I mentioned before, you need to know yourself. And I don't mean that in some trivial way. I just have to point out, do you see that tower crane right there? Oh my gosh, like, I don't know where that came from in terms of, was it Orbx scenery, or was it prepared scenery, or was it the pilot scenery? But it's nice, just to have the detail of the tower crane. That's cool, but I digress. Okay, so you have to know yourself. As I mentioned before in the previous video, if you're a commercial airliner, mesh isn't going to be that big of a deal to you because you're going to be flying high and you're not going to really get a chance to enjoy it as much as you could. So really, if you're doing the general aviation, flying between elevations like I am here, a few hundred feet, or between 5 and 1,000 feet, then the mesh is going to be more important. But I would argue that one of the first things you want to invest in is the global scenery. The global scenery is going to give you the most bang for your buck because it's going to enhance the scenery that you have in terms of autogen trees, vegetation, and buildings. So I recommend myself Orbx Global. But as I mentioned in the other video, there are other brands. There's all, so do your research, look for these brands because some are more expensive than others. Orbx is like $95, so this is not trivial, but what you get for your $95 is you have a global enhancement of territory. I'm not going to say that I know this for a statistical fact, but a lot of people tend to fly in the United States and North America. Many fly in Europe. You'll have our friends who are like flight simmers in South Africa or Argentina. Well, I'm really meant to say Central and South America. So the global scenery covers this terrain. So you get wherever you want to fly, you're going to get coverage. Now, after you get that global covered, that global scenery, I might suggest either getting, especially if you did Orbx, either getting Europe. They have a LC detail that's for Europe, and then they also have one for, I'm just loading this up real fast, I want to get my notes together. They also have one for, there's a more detailed region for North America, and they also have it for Europe. So it's FTX Global Open LC Europe and Open LC North America. You might want to get one of those depending on what region you like flying in the most. Like, if you fly in the United States a lot, it wouldn't really serve much purpose in flying in Europe unless you were going to say, well, I want to try something new, and I'll get this to complement FTX Global. But the global base pack, you know, you can't get the FTX Global and use it for Europe or for North America unless you have the global base. So that's where you got to go first. And with FTX, once you have the global base, then everything else can be added to complement in terms of the general scenery. So maybe you, if nothing else, go with FTX Global Base, and then when you have the opportunity, because this is expensive, it's $95, it's not a trivial buy. The ultimate scenery by pilots is not inexpensive either. It's on sale right now. It's listed as 120. I believe this is American dollars. It's on sale right now, and I picked it up for 90. So, you know, you're about to spend $100 and then $100. And if you bought, you know, Prepar3D version 4 for $200, and it's the professional edition for $200, okay, now you're dropping like $400 just to have a really good looking sim. So I'm not, you know, being naive and just thinking everyone has that money to throw around. You want to definitely save up for it, but that's why I was kind of doing these tutorials, to kind of lay out a rubric of what might be a good order to buy scenery so that you're enjoying it the best you can as you're building up these different components for your flight simulator. So, you know, I'm just flying around the Seattle area so that you can get an appreciation of what the mesh is really doing. And I also, if you'll notice, I have the shadows for the clouds enabled. Really does give this a nice, rich rendering that makes it seem so real. I want to also point something else out. I want to bring this up. I'm going to do a tutorial when it comes to what hardware you want to buy, but I want you to remember this rule. I want you to remember the rule. The average needs to be your minimum. Let me say that again. The average needs to be your minimum. And what I mean by that is, I know sometimes that we may not have a lot of money and we might say, well, I can get by if I can just get, you know, a solid state hard drive, and they're kind of expensive, so I'm going to purchase the smallest drive. That should do. Well, yeah, but here's the thing about getting some get by. Like, if you really wanted to add this mesh is almost like 80 gigs of data. It took me 2 days to download all of this just to get it on my computer before I even installed it. So you had to have drive space to download it to, and then you have to have space on your drive where your flight simulator, whatever it is, Steam Edition 10, Prepared 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to have drive space in order to save this scenery. Therefore, if you've got the bare minimum drive, it's not even going to fit. So you don't want to get caught into situations like that. So in the long run, at the very minimum, get the average size. Not the biggest drive on the market, not the smallest one that's available. You really want to think about at least getting the average size of any given thing. That would go for your CPU, that would go for your video card, and I'm not just saying that you get the average. I'm simply saying that if you gotta get, I can only afford the bare minimum, your minimum needs to be the average. That way, as things are coming out and more technology is being released and different programs have larger sizes, or as you're adding more and more third-party airplanes and scenery, you're not going to run out of hard drive space. And now you're having, after you bought that drive, you're having to invest in a whole nother drive because you don't have the space on your drive to run it. And then you have to deal with uninstalling and reinstalling or cloning. It just makes life a lot more difficult in the long run. So remember this rule: your minimum needs to be the average. That being said, this is a big program. As I said, it's almost 80 gigs. It took me 2 days to download everything, but once it was all downloaded, everything went kind of smooth. It took about an hour for it to install in the computer. And so the question I'm sure you're asking is, well, was it worth everything you paid? I'll put it like this. Can you fly Flight Simulator, Prepared, whichever version? Can you fly it without Ultimate FS Global Ultimate Next Generation Mesh? Absolutely. You don't need it. Would it enhance the game so that you would... I'm sorry, I really don't like using that term, the simulation. Will it enhance the simulation so that it'll make it more immersive? Absolutely. Is it worth the $90 that you paid for it? Well, I think the best thing that I can say as far as that's concerned is I don't regret spending the money. I don't have buyer's remorse. It really has made the simulator look better. It is more immersive. It makes the scenery look that much more beautiful. I don't regret spending it. I'll be glad when it's been out a while and they offer some sales or enough people have bought it that it drives down the cost. But is it worth saving up for? Absolutely. Now, you could go with an earlier model like Pilot's Global Scenery Mesh 2010, but I would definitely say, because I have the 10 installed on my Flight Simulator Steam Edition, this is more detailed. It's more accurate. I really enjoy it, and now that I've seen it, I wouldn't fly without it. Now, before I let you go, what are my concerns? Because this isn't a fanboy review by any means. I want to look at the pros and the cons. Here are your pros. It enhances your visual experience with your flying. The renderings are I shouldn't use renderings. What it produces in the difference in topography is excellent. I will say on the con is this issue with the differences in elevations with the airport. Because as you can see right here around this red pointer at the front of your screen, I'm kind of pointing at that ledge, that plateau that a lot of these airports have. I don't know if it's all of them, I don't know if it's many of them, I just know that I see it in certain airports. I don't see it quite so much when I'm using third-party airports, but that's because they have more accurate elevation information. But it's there. The con is you got to deal with that. Another pro that I would say for it is it's going to get you to... I feel like it's going to get you to get into Flight Simulator that much more. I'm going to have to say this. I am a huge Flight Simulator 10 fan. Flight Simulator Steam Edition, Prepar3D version 4. It's this, I've really looked forward to it. But I'm going to have to give props where props are due. X-Plane 11 out of the box looks 10 times better. So you get to see scenery without spending so much money. That being said, it's a preference of what system you like. But all of that being said, this definitely enhances your Prepared, your Steam Edition experience, that it gets it to where it needs to be. Further with the cons, it's a high price. I don't care for it. Not everybody can afford that. People work hard. Maybe you're young and your parents have to buy you everything. I'm not going to make the assumption that anybody out there has money to just throw at this. So with that respect, I'm kind of down on the exuberant price. But as I said before, I don't believe it's something that you will regret. If you save up for it, I think you'll be glad that you did, because it really does enhance. By the way, if you ever use the submarines, they even deal with the topography under the water. You can choose to load it or not load it. Another con, and it's not anything that they could really do anything about, but I have to bring it up, because there is so much information that is in this mesh, it's going to increase your load times. To the point that it's annoying, well, depends on your patience. But, I want to be very clear. Your load times when you're bringing up Prepared and then loading your scenery and getting into flying, that's going to increase. They said that they've optimized it so it's like really not big load times. Well, that is a relative term. It's longer than what it was when you paid for it, when you bought it out of the box. And I know that's a figure of speech. So, be prepared for increased load times if you buy the mesh. All that being said, I do believe the pros outweigh the cons. It looks wonderful. I really enjoy flying in it, and I felt strongly enough about it that I should do a review. On a scale of 1 to 10, I will definitely give it an 8.5 to 9. I can't give it a full 10 because I still have an issue with the whole elevation in the airports. But as mentioned before, I'm going to give them a little bit of a break because it's a conflict between with the base program elevations and their elevations, and there's only so much that they can do about that. But hopefully somewhere down the line that can get worked out. All of that being said, I do think it's worth it. I give it an 8.5 to a 9. I'll even go as far as to say a 9.5. Well, I hope that this tutorial was, or not, it really wasn't a tutorial so much as a review, but there was some tutorial information in it, so okay, that's fine. But I hope it was informative and that it actually helps you decide what you're going to do in terms of buying your scenery and your mesh, because again, I know this is an expensive hobby, and I want you to be able to get more and more in it. It took me years to build the simulator that I have, and I made some mistakes along the way of what I should have bought, and those are the things that I want to clear up, so that if you're new to sim, you're going to have one of flight simming, that you're going to have the most positive experience, and it's going to get you more and more immersed in the genre, because we're a niche society, but it's a whole lot of fun. So that being said, this is Kent and the Flight Show, and I look forward to seeing you in the virtual skies.